Hello, everyone. Welcome to this LIRA panel, Innovative Models That Give Work a Voice to Non-Union Workers. My name's Steve Greenhouse. It's been a very good day of panels. We have a very good panel ahead of us where members, activists, and various really innovative groups will talk about how they and their groups are seeking to increase worker voice, increase worker power outside the traditional union context. As many of you know, just 6% of private sector workers in the United States are in unions. And there are many worker groups that have sought to, that have formed to try to figure out ways to lift these non-union workers. And today we're lucky to have, 4 members for activists with these groups. First, Helen Colon Hernandez, Director of Policy and Strategic Partnerships at Los Deliveristas Unidos. I'm sorry that Alan McAviney with Alphabet Workers Union was supposed to speak today, but he emailed me yesterday to say that he was very sick. But fortunately, we've gotten Alex Gorawara, a senior software engineer for Google, and someone very active in the Alphabet Workers Union to speak also. We have Sherry Murphy, an organizer with Gig Workers Rising and a longtime Uber and Lyft driver. And finally, we have Daniel Castellanos, a research associate at Resilience Force. And I've asked each of the 4 panelists to speak 5-7 minutes to discuss what their group does, what their group's goals are, what they're doing within the groups, what the group will do next, what how are employers responding to what they're doing. And I should make clear, there are many other non-union worker groups that are making a lot of noise, that are doing a lot to lift worker voice. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Minneapolis, there's Minneapolis St. Paul, there's a great group, CETUL, the Centro de Trabajadores Unidos en la Lucha, and there are many other groups. And some of you might be asking, well, why don't these folks just try to unionize? Well, many of them represent workers who are classified as independent contractors. Some work with farm workers who are very difficult to unionize. And sometimes, there are various populations that are of workers that are very hard to unionize. Many have some undocumented workers among them. Anyway, I will shut up and I will let Hilda Lynn begin to talk about her terrific group, which is here in New York where I am, that has accomplished a whole lot. So Hilda Lynn, I pass the mantle to you.
Thank you. First, thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to share this conversation. I represent a group of workers called Los Deliveristas Unidos, or LDU, or translation will be Delivery Workers United. It's a collective of app delivery workers that actually have unified to actually deal with what all of us care about, which is worker conditions, employment conditions, issues at the job, and to make sure that workers are respected. Our particular group, our members work for all the apps, would have same employers at the same time, similar to probably Sherry, right? You work for Uber, for DoorDash, for Grubhub, for Fandoon, Panda, for Showbiz. It's in New York City. There's so many of these apps that you cannot keep up. There's always kind of like we call it now that they're the startups. There's thousands of startups everywhere. And then they're emerging in this delivery industry. But if you hear from the companies, they're going to tell you it's like we're tech industries. That's it. Always going to try to define themselves. The interesting about tech and about all this creation that at the end, doesn't matter what a computer, how efficient it is or not, you need a human person to do whatever the computer needs at the end to do, especially when it comes to delivery of food. Our people started delivery food. Now they're delivering medicines, Gatorade, if you need anything from Joy Reid, if you need balloons for your crisp party, like birthday party, if you need alcohol, whatever you need that you think that it can be delivering home, my workers are actually delivering that. They become the essential of the essential workers during the pandemic because many of us have to shelter at home and dependent on somebody like them to actually bring us food or even basic necessities or Gatorade or medicine to deal with COVID. I will tell you, even that I'm telling this story, the job that they were doing is nothing new. The delivery work is one of the oldest jobs that I think have existed in our lifetime, right? Even we make kind of like stories about the delivery boy, the purple boy, right, that used to bring the newspapers to people's home. So this is a job that we define, and we always said there is an essential as a teacher, as a police officer, as a nurse. We always just say that, but they don't get the protections of the pay that those individuals does. It's just the reality of it. So these workers got together, started as a frustration of many issues that didn't have protections at the time of COVID, PPE, a lot of high incidents of assaults and robberies as they were trying to do their job. And they started to get together to organize themselves and how to organize, and started to come along and finding commonalities about what can we do about it? Like, what is our situations? Who do we are? Meeting each other. In that process of meeting each other, they uncover that they're just not like 2 or 3 in every corner. They're close to approximately the city estimate that there are more than 65,000 of these workers in New York City. This is a city that depends on that. The majority of my workers actually do deliveries in 2 wheels. It's just the landscape of New York City. Like, car is not a functioning system in New York City. You will end up in a traffic for hours. So these workers actually do 2 wheels. They use either e-bikes, regular bikes, or they use actually mopeds to do this. So they started organizing, and they started understanding that, wait, being an independent contractor doesn't classify me to have kind of like 0 to no protections. And they started to push about raising concerns. And we're talking about as simple as, I need to use the bathroom. That is what this campaign actually started with, right? And this is just a technicality, right? The workers, if you go to a restaurant, they always will tell you what bathrooms are for customers or employees. Technically, under the law, my workers are none. They're independent contractors, even that these workers used to kind of like actually do the delivery for the restaurant themselves. And we started to get together to raise a lot of awareness across the country about some of the issues that they confront, which all of us know. Issues of non-payment, issues of tips transparency, issues of distance, long distance. You are at the mercy of the app, whatever they want to send you. And they started to get together and started to organize. And that's actually what is born today to Los Deliveristas Unidos, which is very interesting. And I always say this because they actually Spanglish the delivery world. They make it their own. That's why Deliverista is kind of like come from the delivery. And what they did? Well, these people I think they did the unthinkable, which a lot of people kind of like will say. They passed this 6 laws last year in New York City Council that actually give them protections. For example, to a minimum pay, which we are going to actually a public hearing in the coming weeks, which will be the second one in the country about establishing for these workers, doesn't matter the classification, to have a minimum pay. We're able to win protections about how now workers can determine how far they want to travel. They also have tip transparency. They force the apps, not only one of the things to tell them how much should they pay, but how much should the customer pay, because the apps are very tricky about telling you the $20 came out of their pocket when reality is like $2.50 on an amount and the rest came out of the customer tip. And one of the big things that we got that is basically in a way for us to, that is valuable, is like we got this apps to register with the city. They need to have a license to operate in the city, because one of the big challenges that we had before, everybody will call themselves an app. They will be half successful, disappear, and then the workers were in the lingering, they didn't get paid or issues. So that's one of the big things that we have done in New York City. So I think that covers a little bit, and I will be open for more questions as we do the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Evelyn. Now, Alex, people might ask, why don't the workers at Google, at Alphabet unionize? It's 100,000 workers, and it's not so easy to win a majority of 100,000 workers. Anyway, Alex, you could explain that much better to us about what Alphabet Workers Union has done, why it was formed, what it hopes to do next. The floor is yours.
It's a complicated question, and you did allude to part of the reason that we pursued the minority union structure, because pursuing a union without the same protection, so identifying ourselves as a group, becoming a union first before trying to win over a majority, has gotten us more visibility and protection than we need if we were gradually working our way through over 100,000 employees. And that sort of gets into, but also the 100,000 number, The details of that number is actually a big part of what we do, because we are a union that aims to represent and speak for all Alphabet workers, everyone working at Google and parent company Alphabet and sibling companies like Waymo, the driverless car company. And we don't just want to represent the people with that name on their paycheck. We acknowledge that there are temporary workers, vendors, contractors who effectively work for Alphabet, work 40 hours a week in the data centers that Alphabet owns, or work 40 hours a week answering questions for users, or testing various materials. But because they have different names, because they're technically working for contracting agencies or vendors, they may not receive a lot of the same benefits and a lot of the same dignity afforded to full-time employees. So we try to represent both of these groups and recognize that one of them is working in a significant structural disadvantage. And we also do try to work in the interests of all workers, to the extent possible, member and non-member alike. And one thing that we do is we do work to support each other and provide what I'd call a continuity of support for internal activism. So our roots come from a lot of repeated attempts to organize people for a specific reason, a specific event. In 2018, I believe, there was the women's walkout after a number of revelations about sexual harassment came to light, including the news that someone accused of serial harassment had been quietly let go with a $90 million exit package in exchange for his silence. And before that, we've seen other responses, such as far back as the early 2010s, a push against requiring real names on our social media, in part because of the harm that people acknowledge it would do to people who need to keep anonymous, or people who have chosen names that don't necessarily match legal ID. And eventually we saw this pattern keep happening, where we needed to organize for one thing, for one response. And we recognized that we didn't want to, it wasn't the best thing for us. These efforts were all amazing. And the only note we had was, we can do more of this if we have a sustained structure. If instead of letting each mailing list or set of respondents or petition to sort of fall into history once it's done, if we keep that structure and that momentum going, if we keep building relationships with each other and keep building this worker power, we can do a lot more in the spirit of those movements, those efforts, those protests that we've sort of descended from. So that's a big reason that we have this minority union, because of our strong history in ad hoc and sometimes minority activism. And again, we want to represent everyone, not just the people with an Alphabet company on their paychecks directly. Everyone who is an Alphabet worker, whether or not they are a direct Alphabet employee, because as much as there are often significant material differences, there are some aspects that we do all have in common as workers, and some challenges that we all have to face, and we can all help each other face. And again, it's a large company. You mentioned over 100,000 full-time employees, and that's really only half of the workforce. So the more than 100,000 temporary workers, vendors, and contractors that are not always acknowledged, not consistently acknowledged, organizing such a vast number would be a tremendous uphill battle. And we simply weren't willing to wait until we had 51% of people on board to start taking action, to start building awareness, to start moving more openly, and using our openness as a shield of sorts. So as a union, we're aiming to support fairness and dignity across job roles. We're also looking to support equity across demographic lines. There's some recent articles about someone who was effectively pushed out after making strong efforts towards diversity, equity, and inclusion over the notion over equity among South Asian castes, a form of demographic discrimination that is protected against by law in India, but has certainly made its way over to the US and is not protected here in the same way. And we also want to keep pressure on management, to keep them honest, keep them transparent. As we're going to get into, especially as a small union, we need to pick our battles, but our presence, our voice, also forces management to do the same. The fact that we exist, we believe, it's a strategic factor they have to account for. It's something that is a check on their power, even in their own decisions to exercise it. So in the near future, we are aiming to keep growing and keep making connections, especially since we have come out publicly and we can advertise and discuss with our coworkers a lot more openly, better understand the needs of our membership, especially as that membership changes and grows, and pick the battles that we can respond to, especially with temps, vendors, and contractors. The fight to ensure, basic dignities, basic equities, companies, keeping the simplest of promises. We're building momentum with those battles as we work our way up to even more ambitious things. And as for me, I joined, and I think a lot of my fellow coworkers did, because basically Alphabet has great power and needs to take great responsibility. And without a check on that kind of on management, the avoidance of accountability and responsibility can form a vicious cycle unless we step in to interrupt.
Thank you, Alex. Now Sherry Murphy, a longtime Uber and Lyft driver in California, who's been an activist in Gig Workers Rising. Can you tell us about Gig Workers Rising and what it's doing and what you've done within the group, Sherry?
Thank you, Stephen. So again, my name is Sherry Murphy. I'm a former app-based worker up until the pandemic. I've driven over 12,000 rides. I currently work with Gig Workers Rising, which I will get into a little bit, but I'm also a social justice minister. But before I begin, I want to bring into the space, which is a ritual of mine, of the ancestors of the land in which I'm sitting on this afternoon, is the territory of the Secory people, the initial stewards of this land before the genocide and occupation due to white supremacy. I would also like to acknowledge the enslaved people, the ones who helped build this nation based on the historical economic exploitation. I want to thank them both for their strength and resilience, protecting this land and building this nation. And I aspire to hold my responsibility according to the example. I think it's really important to set that kind of tone as a basis for the economic and racial violence and how it plays out in the app-based industry. I began working with Gig Workers Rising, known as GWR, in 2020 when the pandemic started, and Lyft and Uber were nowhere to be found. Gig Workers Rising is a campaign launched in 2018 to support app-based workers who are organizing for better wages, better working conditions, and respect on the job. Last month, we released a report ringing the alarm on the gig safety crisis. We found out that more than 50 app workers have been killed on the job in just the US alone since 2017. This report was entitled Death and Corporate Irresponsibility in the Gig Economy, an Urgent Safety Crisis. And it notes 50 or more workers who have been killed on the job, including 6 in the first 2 months of 2022. I'll let that sit for a moment. Workers of color and their families were most harmed. And the research also shows that more than 60% of the killed workers identified in the report were people of color, although they comprise 39% of the overall workforce in the US economy. In that same month, in April, app workers mobilized, poured into the streets of Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco to demand gig safety, to demand compensation, to demand a no force arbitration, to demand a transparency, a data, to demand a union. And now, because of how we mobilize and organize, Congress is taking action. U.S. Senators Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, Bernie Sanders, and other members of Congress sent a letter to the CEOs of Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Grubhub, and Instacart, echoing our demands. In that letter, they told the corporations that their business model penalizes those drivers for tearing down rides because they deemed it as dangerous, and incentivize instead to take rides in picking up passengers, all the while denying them basic employment benefits and safety protections. The letter further demands that each corporation releases comprehensive data on the dangers its drivers faces on the job, transparency that is sorely needed, understand the risks that these workers face, and urge the CEO to promptly change direction and start making their workers' health and safety a top priority. We must keep in mind that even though that these transportation and delivery corporations transform the way in which we do business, they also came at a cost that cost the lives and harm and injuries to these workers. I've seen many drivers become entrapped in the gig economy where app workers found themselves in a constant cycle of working just to keep working, facing a deadly disease in an effort to secure their rent, denying unemployment benefits, or not even having access to a restroom or personal protective equipment. Proposition 22 in California was a ballot measure that passed that doesn't even allow us to form a union, which is now being challenged. I'm going to close with this. App corporations are simply not doing enough to protect their workers to make their apps run. Instead, the bedrock of their model is to ride on the backs of their workers, to offload the risk, shutting out safety net programs for their workers, like workers' compensation, paid family and sick leave, despite how dangerous the work is. And too many workers are left on their own to figure out strategies to protect themselves. And it's time for a change. Thank you.
Sherry, thanks very much. So now we have Daniel Castellanos, who's a research associate with Resilience Force. For those of you who are not familiar with Resilience Force, it's a really innovative group that really goes to bat, fights for these workers. You know, when there's a hurricane, when there's a flood, when there's a tornado, often, dozens or hundreds of workers are sent in to clean up the mess, to clean out the basements, to clean up the wrecked houses. And they are often immigrant workers, and many of them work out of New Orleans, Louisiana, Texas. And Resilience Force is a new group that really seeks to help these workers who are often, marginalized, often sleep in tents when they're when they drive into these cities. So Daniel, the floor is yours. I'm looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, you described very well what is Resilience Force. The global warming is a reality. A lot of people denied this before, but the increase of the global warming make that there were more natural disasters, hurricane, tornado, wildfires, etc. There is a big industry around the natural disasters. The big industry that you don't know. I see this because I organized since Katrina, and there were a little group of companies around that, and now it's a lot. For this reason, we create a new category of workers. And we call resilient worker. The worker that works in a disaster. We call and they specialize to disasters. We organize them. Most of them are immigrants, but not all are immigrants. Many people look them as a hero because they came to clean up all the problem that the natural disasters create. But unfortunately, many people in different cities, in the cities that they arrived, they were looked as a threat. We see very big problems when they arrive to these places. The first thing is the way theft. Many of them, they work, they clean up, and they do all the work that they can for the city or for the company that they hire, and they were not paid, using their immigration status against them. The second thing that we see very often is that there are a lot of accidents in the work sites. Why? because they are immigrants or there are people that they are in this place. They don't used to give them PPE, protection equipment, no, for them. You know, it's very. We see very often that this guy fell from the roof, but the problem is not the accident. The problem is what happened after the accident, because many of the employers don't have a real responsibility of them, even though they have their insurances, you know, worker compensation and this. They left the worker in the hospital and they say goodbye. I don't see you anymore, and they go. You know, you know, when all the time I'm organizing these workers, I see many of these cases. You know, the third thing that we see very often in any place we go, because you have to understand that we don't know where and when is going to be the next disaster. You know, but you know, is the interaction of the police. You know, we call the polimigra, no, because there is a local police acting as immigration officer. You know, because they don't understand. Oh, these guys came. You know, they're immigrants. I don't understand Spanish. They start asking for immigration status and arresting people for nothing. You know, these people came to help, and many of them, you know, are not. You know, they don't have a intention to do a crime. You know, what do we do to giving a voice to these workers, no? Because this new group of workers are very new. The first thing that we try to organize them, you know, it's very important. You have to organize them. Is not only to write a paper. No, we go to the field. You know, we go to the field. Me and my group go to the field, try to let them know, inform them, know the rights. You know, and the second thing that we do is giving them an ID. And it's very important, the ID. It's not a state ID or a governmental ID. It's an ID from the organization. But this ID, you know, because there are people that are coming from a place to place, it's very important to the ID said the name, the date of birth, and said what is the storm, what is the name of the storm, and why they are there. Because we said hurricane worker or a tornado worker, you know, and this is very important. Why? Because with that, they show this to the police, the local police, and they know that they come from our organized group. You know, last year during Hurricane Ida, we gave more than 1,000 IDs to workers. More than 1,000 IDs. Imagine how big is the amount of workers that they are there, no? And we didn't cover all of them. The third thing that we do is to create a direct channel from the workers to the local or the federal government. How is that? You know, immediately we know that the hurricane hit, for example, Tampa, Florida. We go. One of the part of our team goes and meet with the local city governments. You know, and we try to introduce the workers to them, no, to don't have this problem again. We showed the ID. We said many people want to come with this ID, and they are good people. They come here to do good things, not to do crimes. You know, and that worked very well. Another thing that we do is to try to connect with the federal government. No, last February we brought Marty Walsh, the Secretary of Labor, you know, from Washington D.C. to La Place, Louisiana, where the workers were doing the reconstruction. You know, and he saw in you know, direct how these working people are doing, you know, and many of them, as Steven described, they don't sleep in their cars. They don't have a place to go to a restaurant. They have a place to eat, you know, and that's the reality of these workers, that they come to help. And you know, and with Martin, once we go to we have a good conversation, and he said this season, hurricane season, it will be different, and we are following up with him. And you know, the last thing that I want to tell to you is that we're creating channels of legalization of these workers. No? Many of the workers are immigrants, not all, but you know, and they don't have work, they don't have papers. Many have asylum, many are local, many are black, you know, but you know, the majority of them, we are creating this channel of legalization because we are part of the essential workers bill, you know, and you know, in the essential workers, we push a lot to have the name of resilience worker, and the last item of the list of workers because they were nurses, doctors, and all of this. But the last name is resilience workers. The resilient workers are the workers that I described, and we push for that. And now we are with two champions fighting in the Senate and the House of Representatives to get them legalized. That is very, very important because, as you said, these people are willing to unionize in the future. But now many unions don't accept them because they are undocumented or they don't have the ability to be there, no? And that I want to stop here. This is very good conversation.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to ask a few questions, then I will open it up for questions from the audience. I recommend if you have questions, members of the audience, put them in chat and I will read them. So first I have a question for Hildelyn. So Los Deliveristas began as a small group, almost all immigrant workers, very few of them are citizens, many of them don't speak English, yet your group has been able to get a whole bunch of landmark pieces of legislation to the New York City Council, requiring restaurants to allow them to use the bathrooms. That was a big problem. Making sure that they get their proper share of tips. Another law says that the deliveristas don't have to take these ridiculously long trips over bridges, for miles and miles. It gives them a power to reject certain trips. So Hildelyn, can you talk about how your group managed to get the big bad New York City Council to pass this legislation?
Well, I think it was awareness, right? Like, I think the challenge of what we have is that workers, we have to make people aware about what's happened. I think the gig economy and people that work for the apps, and I think Sherry will chime in. Every part of this thing is that every person that is working on the gig economy have an experience, right? The customers, apps have a great, amazing process to make sure that me as customers, when I see my interface, had a good experience, right? And workers were not receiving that, but the customers didn't know, they were not aware of it. And that included elected officials too. You're talking to a lot of people that do not even to this date understand what a gig economy is, right? And I will say something as I hear Daniel. The gig economy is the oldest gig kind of like economy. Just use tech technology, how get into the mix of that gig economy. These workers have been in the gig world, jornaleros. This group have been in the gig for a long time. It's just now that we have technology in the mix of it. We got together. I think what we did in the 6 laws, which all credit goes to the workers themselves. We just got like the workers were looking for commonalities. And those 6 things was that all of them got in common, all of them that were very clear that they needed to do something. Obviously, the high amount of issues of safety on the street, that is something that driving, but they keep to 6 things that doesn't matter language, nationality, doesn't matter if you documented or not documented, which in our members, we do have members that are not documented, that are born American. One of my leaders is Josh Wood. It's interesting because he doesn't speak Spanish, but he works with my workers as a leader. Is find those 6 things. And I think we drove from the message, right? These things that they're asking is just a basic minimum standard, right? Like bathroom is basic. Having transparency about how much the company pays you and what's the tip, it's basic. Like we went in a very specific narrow at the time. And I think we have to tell you the truth. City Council was leading in New York City. This City Council was not going to be re-elected. So a lot of them were not thinking in other complications later on. So we used a lot of things online and we pushed. We came up with very solid legislation that were manageable. We're not talking about kind of like the apps kind of like didn't know what to do and they didn't know what to respond. I always said that the apps, either they still don't know what to do with us, either they hate us or love us because they still cannot figure us out, which have been successful. And we just kind of like keep pushing. And these workers, one of the things that they did, they did March, they highlight in the media. And I think the pandemic helped us a lot because everybody was sheltered at home and we having all of you sitting in a face in a Zoom looking at TV and we're out there pounding and pounding and pounding. And at the moment that one of the most basic thing that they were asking in the moment of pandemic where all of us needed basic necessity was to use the bathroom. How do you go against that? How do you get a company or a city council member to say no to that? So all credit to them and a lot of push, and it was a lot of strategic. It was a lot of strategy behind that, and we got it accomplished. But the fight is not over for sure.
Thank you very much. Now, a question for Alex. Alex, Alphabet Workers Union is up against one of the most powerful companies in the world, often very respected, often very detested as well. But how do you exert pressure on a mammoth like Google, like Alphabet, and how are they responding to you? Are they really fighting hard against you?
It's a good question. And so the first part of that question, so how we've been exerting pressure on them, part of it has been to continue to amplify the same efforts, the same workers' voices that were strong before the union, the same internal activism that we've seen pop up in response to these sort of big, often unethical moves, such as around military contracts that people were working on and were supporting, that their work was supporting without their knowledge. But also by bringing more and more voices into fold. Again, a lot of the outreach has been around the fact that we have at Alphabet effectively a two-tier system of workers, temporary vendor and contractor workers not being the face of and not receiving the same equity and dignity and support as a lot of the full-time workers. And as for the response, well, there are a lot of things that we can say fairly and negatively about Alphabet's management. But one thing that I do have to give them is that even when they are pursuing goals that are maybe selfish or short-sighted or immoral, they are not dumb about it. So what they've done is, I think, the safest move that they can do, which is largely nothing. They have said, we're not going to take a big stance on this. I believe that their approach is to try to reduce the amount of fuel they give us, the amount of engagement, because the story of Alphabet coming down hard on a small union, entering into a big fight, the farther that story spreads, the more explosive it becomes, the more people hear about us, the more power we gain, the more attention we get. So yes, they've been smart in not doing too much, because in becoming public, we have granted ourselves a lot of protection. The labor laws in the US are limited, deeply imperfect, not always great, but one thing that they do kind of function decently at is if it is very overt that someone is part of a union. So for example, I've got my work profile picture and it's got a red and white union ring around it for the Alphabet Workers Union. If we've made it very clear that we're a union, we're recognized, this is protected concerted activity, it's a lot harder for Alphabet to take retaliatory action. So our visibility and the gains that has already gotten us have been some of our best protection and have sort of backed Alphabet management into the corner where the best they can do is avoid feeding us. And that's at most going to slow down what could have been a meteoric rise. It's definitely not going to stop anything.
Thank you. Question for you, Sherry. So, Uber and Lyft drivers, gig workers rising in California has been in the middle of some of the nation's biggest labor battles over the past few years, getting the state legislature to enact AB 5 so that many drivers would be treated as employees rather than as independent contractors. Then there was the big fight over Prop 22, where the company spent $200 million to clobber you over the head. So what did Gig Workers Rising do to make its voice heard to win on AB 5? And what did you do to try to win against the companies with Prop 22?
I think it's important those are all really like four key areas, and we really need to go back to the fight that we had with the Dynamex decision. The Dynamex decision was really to determine who was an employee and who was basically an essential worker. And The Dynamics decision is also known as the ABC test. We were able, out of that particular law, we were able to not only to determine who was an independent employee, independent contractor, and who was an employee, but we were also able to establish minimum wage. It was then that we had AB5, right? To address the state disability, the unemployment, and collective bargaining. But as a result of that, these gig corporations decided to upend labor protections by purchasing Proposition 22. And so as a result of that, the ability of not being able to form a union, we are continuing to organize. We will continue to fight. And just recently, we were able to publish a report that illustrated that there are over 50 workers who have been killed on the job since 2017. These are reports, these are stories that we were able to gather on individual sessions, in worker meetings, in organizing to develop this report. And after this report, there were senators who wrote letters of inquiry as a result of our organizing and our mobilization. We will continue to fight until we determine a healthy and productive and safe working environment for our workers. I hope that addressed your question.
Thank you, Sherry. So the first question is coming from Tom Culkin in Massachusetts, and this is for you, Alex. How do your members view collective bargaining? How do your members view the idea of representation on Alphabet's board of directors? If management didn't strongly resist, what percentage of your members would want to achieve one or both of those things?
So they are both intriguing concepts. I'm going to answer in the reverse order. So representation on the board of directors, I'm a bit more aware of. It's not something we've discussed too much within the union itself, but calls for an employee representative on the board of directors do go back a long way. I think that was one of the big topics that was circulating around the time of the women's walkout in 2018, as it became more and more apparent that this board of directors was really disconnected from the welfare of the employees. So I suspect that a large portion of the union would be very enthusiastic about having employee representation, not necessarily even union representation, because again, we're a minority union. We don't want to necessarily say that we always know best or that we're fully representative. I think that if we got any employee representation on the board, the union would be ecstatic. As for collective bargaining, the answer there seems to me seems a bit more complicated because we have so many people in so many roles across Alphabet. What we have done is we organized to some extent into workplace units. So that's, I believe, a sort of traditional union organization. It might make more sense to do collective bargaining at that level than at the whole union level. But beyond that, and sort of getting into the reasons why we are comfortable, even preferentially a minority union, we believe that our power comes from more than just a specific set of legal structures or obligations. And collective bargaining, as laid out in U.S. labor law as an obligation for an employer with a majority union, could be a powerful tool, but we think it's just one of many. We see our power as essentially coming from the fact that we are the workers who make Alphabet run. That this company does not happen without us. And to that end, while collective bargaining is an interesting possibility, it's not necessarily our focus or our end goal. So I think that it's something that might be of interest to some members, but not necessarily a priority, at least as it's currently described in U.S. labor law. We're looking, I think, beyond that.
Thank you, Alex. So a question for Daniel and Hildelyn. Both your groups represent some of the nation's most vulnerable, arguably most marginal workers. So how does your group, hear, these workers about, what they want? What is the channel for them to, tell the leadership in your groups, well, these are the issues we want to focus on. And second, since many of your members are very low paid, how are your groups financed? Daniel, you could start.
Yes, good question. And we usually to gather the people every place that we go, gather every week or 2 weeks. With the many of the people and start asking first, giving them some tools to in order to don't violate their rights. But and then we start developing what the political education of what do we want. That we want in the future. What do we want to develop from here to the future? No? And this is a good conversation because not all the people are in the same level. We have to put uniform the knowledge of the people first to start asking that question. Yes, of course, they many of them they want to work, they want to money, they want basic things. But we call the selfish phase to this phase because all the people want for me. I want more money. I want more things. I want more rights. But then when they pass the phase 1, they go to the phase 2. That is what we want for the group. What do we want for our people? What do we want for our community? And that's a good outcome that we wanted to get. No, and we get all this information and we try to translate this to create new bills to go to the places that the big problems are, the risk that you heard about way theft, talking with the mayors or talking with that's the way that we create to channelize all the information from them and how we you say about finance of the organization. We didn't get some money from the workers because the use is not possible in low-income workers. We used to have our getting our grants and money from all the other ways. But it's very important to create that sensation to the workers that they need to collaborate too. And how we collaborate, how we make them collaborate with the community and be more visible and more friendly to the community that they arrive, is that we develop a program named Here to Build, and it's a Sunday, Resilience Sunday, that we call Resilience Sundays, and we go to low-income local people and we work for free for them. We work for free, and and because there are people that don't have money, there are poor people, and we for example clean up their backyard, or we make a fence, and all together, we donate hours of labor, and we create visibility, and and the community start saying, oh, we think they were criminals, but they are not. We change their mind. We try to do that. And I stop here.
Thank you. Before I take Hildelin's answer, again, please, members of the audience, please feel free to use chat to pose questions. So Hildelin, the floor is yours now.
So I think I answered that a bit different. Workers have been powerful. They always have seen it. I think they have seen, and these workers in particular, Deliveristas know what they want. They're being in this process for a while. As I said, many of our workers have worked for the apps for 8 years. They were working for the apps, as they always said, when the apps were not the cool thing, because the apps had to start some workforce, right? I think these workers see themselves differently, right? Like they're the Goliath, and it's kind of like that fight. I think they have never. It's an incredible workforce, because we're talking about also a lot of people as leaders of Los Deliveristas, that they have older generation, that they have experience and have understand and have seen the challenges. They're coming in more to the table how they overcome it. So for us, we see ourselves at the labor. So when I meet with Uber, when I meet with DoorDash, and when I meet with Grupo, there's no even a deduction that we're a union or not. We have passed that debate. We already are. The company have to even explain, respect us as that, and we represent workers. That's how it goes. There's no back and forth on it. And I think that's the approach that we have taken on, right? And the approach that these workers have taken on. In terms of what they want, like, and I agree with Alex. I think we've seen also collective bargaining as tool, but it's not the end. There's a lot of conversations here that we need to have, and just a normal reaction as we in technology, as I said, workforce, our work is being changed. So the collective bargaining has to take an even more broader perspective about how this is play out. In terms of for us funding, how do we do it? It's so we are Los Deliveristas is funded by Workers' Justice Project, which is an organization that, as Daniel mentioned, get grants from foundation in order to channel the organizing. Workers in our side, we have a membership due of $50 a year, which every member contribute, and it's part of the services that we have. And it's just a process for them to getting them used to it and testing of what, when we have our union in the future, which, and I will clarify, is not the traditional union that people see. We are looking for something else, and we're open to how different forms of what, and it's just how it looks. And we are debating that, right? And workers are asking themselves that question. Like, we will get there, but it's a process, but it's a lot of determination from these workers. They have come out of the shadows. They're here. They're not hiding. They kind of like, it's incredible. We have actually, my workers have met with the companies even a few times. So I think they see themselves very different.
Thank you. So a question from Janet Wilder. What is the labor movement, this is for everyone, what is the labor movement doing to support your group's organizing efforts, your group's growth? Let me begin with Sherry. Uber and Lyft drivers are in the news a lot. Is gig workers rising? Getting much help from the larger labor movement? Sherry, are you there?
I'm sorry. I was talking to myself.
Sorry.
I got to take myself off of mute. When the $200 million campaign came down from the CEOs, or more than I like the term them, cronies, came down to fight and upend labor protections, labor unions were pitching in to help. They even poured in money to fight against Proposition 22. They're also heavily involved in our local actions. We have a beautiful relationship with SEIU as relates to mobilizing and organizing our riders. So they're definitely involved.
Hilda and Alex, Daniel, are you getting much help from the larger labor movement, from larger labor unions?
I'll go next, Steven.
Okay.
We visibilize the work of these workers, the new group of workers that nobody knows that they were. And, and of course, many of the unions start looking at us, and start talking, start a conversation in between how to get these workers unionized. And we are in this phase, talking. But I think in the future, we will unionize these workers. We could have a union of workers, of resilient workers at least. And yes, this is the track that we have to go, but it's not nothing. We don't have nothing right now. It's only a conversation, and I think we could make something real in the future.
If you seek to unionize them, Daniel, who will be the employer? Will FEMA be considered the employer? Who would be considered the employer?
And that's the way of conversation that we are. We don't know exactly, but FEMA it will be. Why not? Because they are the entity of the government that that goes to the disaster. Why not? And actually, DOL said we have to talk with FEMA. When we talk with the Secretary of Labor, he said that we have to converge efforts together.
Then Alex and Helen, do you want to add anything about whether you're getting any help from the larger labor movement?
But I can say for us, it's a bit complicated. We actually in New York City, unions at some point were at the table with some of these apps, negotiating a sectorial bargaining without our consent, without even us knowing. And we shut that down. And we're talking about the major unions, the SCIUs of the world, the AFS, the AFL-CIO of the world, that actually transpired last year in the last session. By this time, at the last of the hour, they were trying to pull something. And we shut it down. And we actually, and that front into credit, TWU President John Samuelson got pulled into this thing, and he actually gave us an opportunity to say, I want to hear what you guys say, because he came late in the game as all this was maneuvering. He sat down with us, sat down with the workers, asked the question, and after he heard our concerns about this bill that came out of the nowhere, but it has been negotiated for months, he actually sided with us and shut it down. And we actually turned that bill down in the state of New York. That's the statutory bargaining. After that, obviously, with unions, it's been a process. We thought at some points align ourselves with some of the unions, the workers, after having conversations with the union, decided not to. They remain independently. And the reason is because there is a lot of kind of like back and forth. Some unions are in pro about trying to look for how do we do this. Some other unions are very clear that it's reclassification or nothing. I think for us, it doesn't matter what the unions stand. I think what we keep saying, it's like all of us want a better way that workers have more rights and protections. And we need to have that space to figure it out for the workers, what that is. So it's just part of the big family that sometimes you agree, sometimes you disagree. And it's just, we just have to work together as long as we understand that at the end is about the workforce and companies cannot divide us. That's something that we have to keep in mind. But that is a complicated process for, at least in New York City with us in our side.
So we have 4 minutes left. Let me ask one general question to all of you. So, you're all innovative groups. How do you build membership? How do you persuade people to join? You don't have a traditional union vote where you're saying, okay, you can be in this big union where we bargain collectively. How do you get people to join? And let's start out with Alex on that one.
Yeah, so very briefly, we get people to join a lot by individual relationships. So we put a lot of work into figuring out who knows whom, who we can talk to, how we can figure out what the people around us want and whether or not the union can help with that. And it's a lot of one-on-one conversations, a lot of one-on-one organizing. This was especially true before we went public. So back in 2020, before we were overt about things. And it's still true today. We're trying to build that deep interpersonal relationship because so much of what we do is about not just about workers coming together in an organization, but workers coming together and caring for each other and understanding what's important to each other. So a lot of that very personal one-on-one organization to figure out where people are and how best we can help each other.
So Sherry, let me pose that question to you. How has gig worker rising been building membership? Do you just, hope that people come to you, or are you, knocking on doors? What are you doing?
All of that. First, I just want to set the context is that gig corporations have created a very abusive and discriminatory environment and culture, right? That's just the bottom line. And so, people are made to feel bad when they're complaining for lack of transparency, when they're watch their coworkers getting injured or hurt on a job, or they are being asked to sign no forced arbitration clause. And so when you are in these one-on-ones that Alex is pointing to, when you are sharing stories with other people realize that they have a choice. And then the bell goes off. And I think everybody wants a healthy and productive environment, right? And when you have those stories, individual stories that are actually filled with other individual stories, you build collective power. And with collective power is how we make a change and how we make a move.
Thank you. So we have 1 minute left. So Hildelyn and Daniel, 30 seconds each if you want to add anything else.
First is similar to but I think what they mentioned, but I think it's like we overcome the first hurdle. People have to trust us. Once they trust us, we are at the point that people are walking into our office. And I think sometimes it's for servicing, and we turn servicing into organizing. At the end, my workers work 10 to 12 hours a day. So this is their bread and butter, even that the company's trying to say otherwise. So it's kind of like a little bit of a combination of that, but we have overcome through the process that illegitimacy that I think workers now see us as the way. at the organization that they look when they are in deep need.
Daniel, you're playing cleanup batter here. Okay.
Yes. No, yes, the thing is we have to be there. I think it's a little bit different from the other organization, but we usually to show in the field, with the workers, and the workers start looking us and saying, oh, you are there, and I see you in last disaster, and right now, and they start calling others saying, okay, look, this organization is representing us, and we gave the ID. The ID is a hook. And we start getting them for meetings, and we start the political education. It's a step by step. We have to be there. You organize. You have to be there. That's the key. You don't have to be in your office writing papers. No, you have to be there with your people. And I feel with this.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Hildeland. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Alex, who came in to pinch hit at the last minute. I think this has been an excellent panel. I really appreciate it. And we thank the Labor and Employment Relations Association for sponsoring this excellent conference. So thank you, all of you, and keep well and keep up the fight.
Steve, that was terrific.
Thanks. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah,
Thanks.
there's an answer in, Steve, I asked a question that didn't get addressed, but Alex,
Why didn't I see your question?
well, we'll take a look at his answer, which is very helpful.
Yeah.
He put
I
an
see.
answer
I
in-
see that Alex is writing to Robert, but I didn't see a question from you. Maybe it was just to Alex, and I didn't see it.
No, it was a little earlier. It's there.
I don't see it, sir. It's not on my stream.
Well, it's up. Look
Okay.
at 5:17, time 5:17.
Oh, right. Why didn't I see that?
That's all right.
That's weird.
We got
Okay.
a great answer.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Believe me, I would. I for some reason I didn't see that. That's weird. Okay, sorry.
No, I think the use of these interest groups that the corporations support is a natural ally
Yeah,
for the organizing effort.
that's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
Right.
I
Anyway, great set.
think the reason I missed your question was as soon as I asked Tom's question and then Alex answered, I wrote to Alex, said, do you know who Tom Koken is? And then I was busy. So I missed, and Alex did not know who Tom was. So I think that's the reason I missed your question. I'm sorry. So hoping you're well, sir. Hoping to get up to.
Let me just say hello this way. Okay.
Okay, and hoping to see you up in Cambridge in September for the
For Tom, for the festival for Tom.
September, October.
Absolutely.
September, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Be well.
All
Keep
right.
well. Okay.
Good session. Steve.
Thanks.